Allow me to extend a warm welcome to all the viewers on the internet and around the world. It is sunrise on YouTube, morning on Facebook, noon on Twitter, midday on Threads, afternoon on Twitch, sunset on Instagram, and evening on Rumble. I am your host, the Ancient One, the Bachelor Supreme, the Phantom Menace, he who remains, and the master of the deceptive arts. We are broadcasting live directly from the sanctum of solitude and the citadel at the end of time. Good evening, everyone. I am the Ancient One, the Bachelor Supreme. I am the Phantom Menace, he who remains, and I am the master of the deceptive arts, and I return to you once more as the proud and unsilenced voice of the vasectomites. Today, I wanted us to ponder the question of evolution, especially the question of evolution with regards to us, the vasectomites. And I wanted you to ask yourself, are vasectomites still human? Or vasectomists, which is a word that I learned recently. Are you, as a vasectomist or a vasectomite, still a human being? Or have you evolved into something other than? I have asserted before that our fundamental practice, which is our philosophy, and which is rather, let me say, what our philosophy and what our way of life is built on. It is built on this practice and this practice alone. Freeze your sperm and get a vasectomy. I know I say it all the time, but I think eventually you probably get used to it or just silence me out, right? But either way, I know it's there in the back of your mind and your subconscious. And I'm going to say it one more again, and I'm going to say it every single opportunity that I can get. Freeze your sperm and get a vasectomy, and thereby you become a vasectomite, as we've come to define it, right? Now, I cannot take credit for the vasectomy because the vasectomy is about 203 years old. And the lifespan of the Ancient One, the Bachelor Supreme, is around 100 years old. So I'm not taking claim for something that's easily 100 years older than I am. And sperm cryopreservation, which is sperm freezing, is almost 74 years old also. So really, I cannot claim credit for either one of these practices, these inventions, or these procedures. However, I can take credit, and I do claim credit for bringing these two magnificent inventions together to create what I believe is a new way of life for humanity, right? These were seemingly or viewed seemingly as completely unrelated and unconnected procedures in the social, economic, and even in the medical world. And I, the Bachelor Supreme, I, the Ancient One, me, I have brought them together to create one sound, unifying philosophy, a new practice for mankind. Nowhere else has this combination of medical inventions been mentioned. It has never been mentioned in any scientific text, at least that I have read or that I have heard of. I have not heard it in any talks. I have not seen it in any journals or any novels or any documentaries. I have not seen it in fiction. I have not heard about it in practice. I haven't even heard about it in any kind of novelization, not even in movies. and definitely never ever mentioned in any kind of religious or philosophical texts or writings. In fact, not even the internet or your precious AI has been able to make this calculation correctly, right? To bring these two things together and have it work so magnificently. Not even AI has been able to create that calculus, not yet. And thereby, I assert that I have created a new way forward and a new way of life for those who choose it and for mankind. Never before has man, as a species, even conceived of such a move, let alone at such a small and nominal cost. It's not just the impact that this move will make of freezing your sperm and then getting a vasectomy. It's that you make that impact at such a low, a nominal cost. It's so cheap. And and in truth, you and I, we have only just begun to know that this opportunity is even available. This hasn't even become popular. People haven't even grasped what it means yet. So we're just starting to know that it's even available. We haven't even fully defined it in terms of a grand scope. Imagine 1 million men. Imagine 10 million. Imagine 100 million. Freezing their sperm, getting a vasectomy. What will this mean for future generations? Imagine being born 300 years, a direct descendant of somebody that died 300 years ago, a direct descendant of Julius Caesar or Marcus Aurelius. Picture perfect DNA sample of Genghis Khan. Imagine what is possible for the future. We have only just begun to define it, let alone know what it means for science, for evolution, for history, for philosophy, for economics, for society, and even for humanity, right? Being able to preserve living genes of critical people into infinity. That has to mean something. Genes that can be reproduced into life, like that individual. Not exactly, but life like a real individual. Any person, right? And then 1,000 years later, another descendant directly from that person. This can have some serious ramifications that I believe. And there's no going back. There's really no going back. Pandora's box is wide open now. The genie is out of the bottle, and this cat will never be put back inside of the bag. It's never going back inside the bag. So so let's define together what it actually means to evolve, right? So we can try and see that if we as vasectomites and vasectomists, if we fit this definition, right? I'm going to look at two words: to evolve and to develop, right? What do these words actually mean? Evolve actually means to develop gradually, right? To develop over time. Develop means to grow and become more mature, advanced, or elaborate, right? So when you evolve, you grow, you become more mature, more advanced, more elaborate over time. You become better over time. You become improved, right? Synonyms include improve, flourish, and prosper, to thrive, right? I believe that should you follow the two steps, right? The rule of two of the vasectomites. First, freeze your sperm, then get a vasectomy, right? By the way, one one session of freezing your sperm, you could get up to like 100 million, 100, between 100 million and 120 million sperm. Like you could go once and that'll be sufficient. You don't have to go like 8 or 9 times like I did, right? But, if you follow the rule of two, freeze your sperm, get a vasectomy, I believe that over time, living like this, you are going to grow, not just mentally, spiritually, right? You'll get better physically, you'll improve financially, economically, you'll grow into a higher echelon and status of life because of that economic growth and that success, right? You'll be able to think clearly. You'll be able to make plans and execute those plans. You'll be able, I really don't want to encourage this, but in earnest, you'll be able to date successfully, right? You'll be able to date successfully. You'll be able to, when people test you to test your loyalty, you'll be able to give your own tests back to see do they love you for you or do they love you for money, right? This, which is always the question. And by the way, she loves you for money, right? Yes, she likes that you are the one that has money, which is good, but she'd rather be the one with the money. And who knows? If she had the money, the question is, would she be with you? That's what you really want to know, and the answer is absolutely not. All right, I can guarantee you that she'd be with a personal trainer. Right, they'd all go for the fit guys, right, who have all day off. But the irony is, if you have money, that means you're working all the time. So so much for that personal trainer story. In my opinion, in my honest opinion about evolution, a vasectomy is exactly that. It is development. It is to grow. It is advancing. And it can be, when executed, quite elaborate, right? You will thrive and flourish and prosper if you live in this way, right? But for it to be evolutionary, not revolutionary, right? Because revolution, I think people have a sort of, especially people who are in authority, they may have a negative connotation to the word evolution, because it sounds so much like revolution, like rebellion. But that's not what we're talking about. We are talking about improvement, to get better, to move to the next level. And I believe that a vasectomy does this. It is an improvement of the individual in the most dramatic sense. Not only that it offers a separation and distinctions from others of the same kind, all right, but also it provides you an endless opportunity to explore things that others of that kind could never even dream of. This is what I mean by improvement and evolution, right? To get better, to grow, to become more mature and more advanced, right? And there are people who make a lot of money and become very successful and distinguish themselves in that way. But then they can return into a more normal type of economy by simply losing it all, by betting the wrong way, by investing in the wrong thing, by marrying the wrong person and divorcing that person, and various other things like, great nations have fallen Forget great individuals, great nations have fallen because of economic strife. This is not to imply that it's not important or that you shouldn't respect people who achieve great economic success. What I'm saying is that in terms of evolution, economic success does not indicate a permanent change. It doesn't, like, become economically successful has quite frankly been one of the most impermanent things that people have ever seen, right? So, you know, in my opinion, therefore, we can deduce that this process of freezing your sperm, I believe, according to the definition, is evolutionary in a developmental, progressive, and elaborate way, right? In simple, it is evolutionary in an upward direction, right? So you go up, and it is an improvement from a previous state, all right? And it's an improvement from others of its own kind that are still in that particular state. And since a vasectomy is permanent, right? And there is no change. There can be no change effectively, right? I mean, yes, you can pay for a reversal, but you're talking about effectively a 90% chance with a tremendous cost. Sorry, a 90% chance of failure with a tremendous cost, right? So I wouldn't take that. I wouldn't go with a 10% success rate of anything. We're talking about 99% success rate of a 99 point, what was it, 95% success rate of a vasectomy, and you're looking at 10% success on a reversal. I'd say if you're trying to get a reversal, you're betting for the wrong thing, right? And you're probably gonna lose. Right, so that's why you gotta freeze that sperm first. That's why you gotta freeze that sperm first. So should you decide that you want children, you can have them. You can be sure you can have them under the right terms, under the right conditions, in the eyes of the law, right? So, effectively, we can go with there is no change, right? For anyone who has been through the process. Once you have become a vasectomite, you can never return to the previous state. Surely that means that vasectomites, if we can no longer return to being like the what we were before, and if our change is permanent, and if our change is in a upward direction, surely that makes it evolutionary. Thereby, I say, not only is it evolutionary, not only is it evolutionary, and it may well be revolutionary too, it may well be a game changer, but not only is it evolutionary, it changes the entire scope of the landscape. It puts the vasectomite, in my opinion, at the top of the food chain, at the very top of the food chain. More so, this is a biological and reproductive change, which not just changes the man, it also changes his function, his capacity, his responses, and his triggers, right? So consider that a man, a normal man, not a vasectomite, probably a knee bender, but a normal man can perform certain things biologically that a vasectomite can, but that man will always get certain results, and the vasectomite will never get those results. So if you are intimate with a knee bender who's not had a vasectomy, you will be inseminated, thereby producing, which is what human beings do. They reproduce through intimacy. Vasectomites do not. This is a massive distinction. Vasectomites do not. While we can be intimate, truly in almost exactly the same way, the consequences and the results are nearly the opposite. In fact, they are, well, nearly the opposite because a knee bender might not inseminate a counterpart today, but eventually they will. And we're talking about the end result, right? I always say keep the end in mind. Keep the end in mind. And I always say know thyself, right? So, therefore, if the consequences are always going to be different, right? It means that the responses, the triggers, the things that you like and dislike about a person that you interact with or are intimate with are going to be completely different. You are going to be a completely different person. And that change, again, is going to be permanent, right? That change is going to be permanent. You no longer have the same biological concerns that you did before. Thereby, you no longer have the same societal needs that you had before. All need is biochemical, right? It all stems, all need, all necessity, all stems from a survival need. So either you survive for yourself or you survive for others, your family, your loved ones, and so forth, right? But all need is biological, right? And if you no longer have the same biological needs in terms of reproduction, right? That means or the same biological concerns in terms of productions. That means your societal needs will change also, which also changes your economic needs. Right? So if you're no longer worried about how much it's going to cost to raise kids, you can move that money into another direction, into another endeavor with no fear. With no fear. Right? Because even if any endeavor fails, you could always just get a job. Seriously, it's just you. You could just get a job and make it through. Sign a 2-3 year contract and make it through. But if you have kids, you cannot take any type of those risks. And it becomes a risk, right? When you're a vasectomite, it's not really a risk. It's more like a choice, right? What happens is you just surrounded and bombarded by choice with very little risk. And the change is not just dramatic, it's fundamental, right to the core. It's effective, it works, and it's permanent, it is lasting, and it endures. However, the change cannot be truly evolutionary if it is only for a limited few, right? If only one in the species can perform this task and do it, then that trait, that action, or that behavior is easily eliminated when that person is eliminated, right? Then you have to ask yourself, right? If nobody else can do what this person has done, right? If the actions cannot be repeated, is this then also part of evolution, right? So we're talking about not just individual growth, but we're talking about as an entire species, right? So can every man freeze their sperm? And I would say yes. Can every man therefore get a vasectomy? And I would say yes, right? Therefore, every man can have that growth, that progress, that development, right? That advancement in an elaborate and upward direction, right? Then we would go, if this was not the case, right? If we could not repeat this, right? Then, in fact, the vasectomite would be in threat of going in the same way as the dinosaur, going in the same way as blockbuster movies, going in the same way as 24-hour news, and also the same way as The Bachelor, and this is to extinction. The Bachelor life, I assure you, has not been able to survive. Not without a vasectomy. Not without a vasectomy, right? And therefore, I say if every man can take that action, right, at any time of their choosing, the chances that the vasectomites will survive and thrive is very, very high. And the chances are that if enough people see it, that it will work, that people will adapt it. This is the idea, you know? And indeed, this process is easily available and can be achieved by every man. Every bachelor, every knee bender, married, single, divorced, or widowed, or can receive the procedure and follow the rule of two. These two simple steps to salvation: freeze your sperm and get a vasectomy. But then there might be the argument that says, oh, but Ancient One, you are still a human in almost every way, except this one small minor detail. And that is exactly the point. The qualifier almost implies not entirely. This circle comes close, but it does not touch all the way at the end. It cannot be called a circle unless that circle is closed and that loop has been severed and then tied and then burned and sealed and then stitched up and put a bandage. Then it was healed and ensured that it will never become undone again. That little qualifier right there, that is the point of which evolution happens. To evolve means to develop gradually. And it is that gradual distinction right there, that minor almost, that makes all the difference. All right? It is the thing that proves the point, and it will prove the point every single time. And in this particular case, almost does count. Almost really does count if you want to be a vasectomite. Vasectomites are, in fact, DNA-wise, biologically speaking, 99.999% human and can perform almost every function that every other man can in exactly the same way, right? So we can perform every function, in fact, that every man can in almost exactly the same way, right? Taking into consideration personal character and preference and so forth, right? But with different complete outcomes, right? With different complete outcomes. And while we can perform all the same actions, I'd like to remind you that so can a cow. So can a cow. The bovine species is 99% compatible in terms of DNA with human beings and with the human species, the primates, right? And I'll go further and prove that. I'll prove that by saying that when you look at a cow, apart from the tail, the horns, and the hooves, the rest of the cow is nearly identical to man. The rest of the cow is nearly identical to man. Yes, the shape might be different, but everything else is pretty much the same. If you had to stand a cow up on two legs, it would stand exactly like a man. It would look almost exactly like a man, right? But this is not only the proof. Right? Let me ask you this. Does a cow have eyes? A man has eyes. Two eyes? Yes. On the head? Yes. Above the nose? Yes. Under the nose, is there a mouth? Inside the mouth, are there teeth? Is there a tongue? Does the tongue taste? Does it have a voice box? Does it have a throat? Does it have a esophagus? Does it have a brain? Does it have ears? Are the ears on the side of the cow's head? Isn't that identical, literally, to a man? Does it have a neck? Does it have a spine? Does it have limbs? Two front limbs, two back limbs? So does a man. Yes, bones, stomach, liver, lung, kidneys, and so on and so forth. Even the reproductive system of a cow is an almost near perfect match. And what does that tell you? It tells you that if a cow can become a vasectomite, then so can you. You have no excuse. If a cow can go and freeze its sperm and get a vasectomy, a man should be able to do it even easier and faster. Evolutionary, every species on Earth, or biologically, shares some or other qualities similar or identical to some other species, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to exist on this planet. We all have to breathe the air. We all have to be able to eat food and walk and make sounds and hear and see and think and ponder to a certain degree. To a certain degree, right? Every animal has to be able to have these things in order for it to even exist on this planet and thereby survive. Even plants share similar characteristics and needs with animals. They need the sun, they need air, they need water, they need safety, they need security, they need cover, in other words, shelter, a place to call home, in other words. So yes, vasectomites are like other creatures on earth, but we also, like all these other creatures, have very distinctive characteristics and qualifications that separate us in a permanent way from the common man and humanity. And this cannot be undone. So you can evolve into a vasectomite, thereby climbing up the food chain, the evolutionary ladder, or you can stay the same. Right? For this reason I say it's hard to classify a vasectomite, in fact, as a human being. Because while we can do most of the same things like other animals and creatures, we cannot share the same destination and the same outcome. For it is your destiny to bend the knee, and it is my destiny to rise. This is the glory of the vasectomite. For these reasons, and the reasons that we will look at in today's edification and reading, I believe that vasectomites have transcended the boundaries and limitations of humanity and risen above to evolve. And now we sit above the common man, and not just as human evolution, but at the top of the natural order, the top of the natural world, and at the top of the entire food chain. And the food chain as a whole, the food chain in its completion, and the food chain with exemption to none. So in the in the pre-reading, this felt really more like a journal, something like a master's degree review and understanding of Darwinism, but we're not actually going to be reading Darwin's theory of evolution in its entirety. It's a massive book, and I had started reading it, and as I started reading it, the origins of species, you know, Darwin said something quite interesting right at the beginning. He says that his book itself is not complete, but he had to publish what he had, his findings, his tremendous findings. But this itself was still evolving, right? So I thought that was quite ironic to read. That in the one hand, it's a tremendous book that gives so much insight into what really when people consider the foremost theory in evolution, which as I'm going through it, I'm really enjoying, and I'm finding that it's well worth the effort and the read. But on the other hand, to consider that he considers his own work incomplete, a part of me can relate to that. I really feel like I can relate to that. But the article is entitled "What is Natural Selection?" It is written by Emily Osterloff. This comes from the Natural History Museum in the United Kingdom, and their website, as well as the link to the actual article, is right there. Their website is www.nhmnaturalhistorymuseum.ac.uk. There was no date given for publication, so this is the best information that we have available to us. It reads, natural selection is the mechanism of evolution. It is the tool of evolution, right? Organisms that are more adapted to their environment are more likely to survive and pass on the genes that aided their success. No passing on of genes here, right? This process causes species to change and diverge over time. Well, we're not passing on genes specifically, but we are passing on a philosophy and a practice. So I suppose we are evolutionary in that way, right? So there is something that will remain. Natural selection is one of the ways to account for the millions of species that have lived on Earth. That's very interesting, right? So it's evolution causes the the emergence of new species, right? This is exactly what we're talking about. Our evolution has created, I believe, a new species, right? One of millions of species that have lived on Earth. So it's not new. It's not new for the world to accommodate a new species like ours. Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace are jointly credited with coming up with the theory of evolution by natural selection, having co-published on it in 1858. Darwin has generally overshadowed Wallace. This is true since the publication of the On the Origin of Species in 1859. However, okay, so they published a book. The next year, he published another book, which was better, and such as life overshadowed his friend. But I'd really like to know more about their relationship. They must have made some tremendous discoveries. In Darwin and Wallace's time, the most believed that organisms were too complex to have natural organs. Had Let me read that again. Darwin and Wallace's time, most believed that organisms were too complex to have natural origins and must have been designed by a transcendent God. That's very interesting. So people believed that organisms didn't evolve by themselves and were part of a greater design by God. So God just made everything the way it was. Natural selection, however, states that even the most complex organisms occur by totally natural processes. Very interesting. Our researcher, Professor Adrian Lister, says it's not that biologists don't understand that organisms are complex and functional, and it does seem almost miraculous that they exist. We realize that, but we think we found another way of explaining it. Let's proceed with confidence. How does natural selection work? This is really what we want to talk about. This introduction was a little bit cumbersome, if I have to be honest. In natural selections, genetic mutations, right, genetic modifications, changes that are beneficial to an individual's survival are passed on through reproduction. Reproduction. So the things that you need to survive genetically, the changes and mutations, are adapted through experience and then passed on to the next generation through genetics, if I'm understanding this correctly. This results in a new generation, right, of organisms that are more likely to survive, to reproduce, right? So if if the next generation of, you know, children and so forth are healthier or have the inclination and the evolution to survive, to live, they are also more likely to reproduce. So in other words, for our case, if we can survive spreading the message, the longer we are there to spread the message, the more likelier the message will get spread, right? And the likelier that we are therefore going to grow and multiply. For example, evolving long necks has enabled giraffes to feed on leaves that others can't reach, giving them a competitive advantage. This is true. Thanks to a better food source, those with longer necks were able to survive, to reproduce, and so pass on the characteristics to the next generation. This is very interesting. So you see this in the dating market too. And effectively, what's happening here is it's the giraffe neck hypothesis. So the taller the creature, the more likely it is to have access to a better source of food in nature, in trees that are up above than the shorter, smaller tree. Therefore, because they will have access to better resources, they are more likely to pass on their genes. Yeah, I think I've heard this somewhere before. I think I've heard the prognosticator say something exactly like this. I've heard him say something exactly like this, right? So it is evolutionary. It is evolutionary. What does this mean for vasectomites? Well, it means the same thing, right? If you can become a vasectomite, if every person that becomes a vasectomite becomes successful, becomes wealthy, has all their options, and thrives, right? This will give you advantages. So you will have resources and other things that are deemed necessary, not just for survival, but also for reproduction. Thereby, you may very well have an opportunity to reproduce or at least practice reproduction. It says thanks to a better food source, those with longer necks were able to survive and reproduce and so pass on the characteristics to the next generation. I think I read that. Those with shorter necks and access to less food would be less likely to survive, to pass on their genes. This is natural selection, right? So this is what happens naturally, right? Yeah, what can you do? What can you do? I agree. I agree completely with all of this, and you see it playing out instinctively in the dating market, right? We live in the economic world. Humans live in the economic world. Therefore, and humans and human like, right? Humanoids, vasectomites, we all live in an economic world. Therefore, it stands to reason that the one with access to better resources has the better chance of reproducing. Reproducing anything they want, really. Resources are everything. Money comes first. I say it all the time. Money comes first. Adrian explains, if you took 1,000 giraffes and measured their necks, they're all going to be slightly different from one another. Those differences are at least in part determined by their genes. The ones with longer necks may leave proportionally more offspring because they're fed better and have maybe been better in competing for mates because they're stronger. Then, if you were to measure the necks of the next generation, they are also going to vary, but the average will have shifted slightly towards the longer ones. The process carries on generation after generation. So this is very true. You have heard of a situation where people say that humans have become taller. So where the average height of a person was about, I think it was 1 meter 5, right? Or under, it was something like 1 meter 4. Like human beings used to be very, very short. The average now is about 175. So it went from 145 to 175 right? And the way it looks now with people dating 6 feet and over, the average height is of humanity is probably going to be like 5'11", 5'11", 5'12". But effectively, you know, the average height was about 5 feet, and then it went up to like 5'8", 5'9", and I think now it's about 5'9" or 5'10", the average height of a person. I believe that soon it'll be around 5'12", and then eventually 6 feet. Like people are just gonna get taller and taller. But this example is demonstrated here by the giraffes. Is that if you measured 1,000 of them, they say, and you took, like an average, right? What would happen is the taller ones that have access to more food would have still a better opportunity of reproducing. And generations later, if you measured the giraffes, the average height, there would still be differences, but on average, they would all be taller, right? And this would continue. So what they're saying is that giraffes, along with humanity, is getting taller. Our next point here is, what is adaptation? An adaptation is a physical or behavioral characteristic that helps an organism to survive in its environment. So I believe this is like when you're in a new environment and you learn the language, you learn the food, you learn the roads, you learn everything, you adapt, right? You eat, you change, you evolve, you adapt, as we have, right? To the new environment, to the changing landscape, to the world that we live in. But not all characteristics of an animal are adaptations. Adaptations, for one purpose, can be co-opted for another. For instance, feathers were an adaptation for thermoregulation, which is warmth. Their use for flight only came later. This means that feathers are an acceptation for flight rather than an adaptation. So, if I'm understanding this correctly, what they're saying is that when you can have a behavior that serves one function but evolves to do something completely unexpected, right? So he says here that feathers are actually there to cover up the bird and keep them warm. The fact that they were helpful in flight was developed later by coincidence, merely by the fact that they needed to have feathers to stay warm. They were therefore able to fly. This is very interesting. This provides a very interesting dynamic for the vasectomites, right? The fact that we have frozen our sperm and then got a vasectomy can indeed, dare I say, lead us down a path that we were not expecting and evolve into something else. I did not anticipate that I would be here as the voice of the vasectomite, delineating this information with you here today. I had an inclination of doing something of the kind, but not on this very serious, very important topic, and not under these circumstances. I was going to do something a little bit more work related, and I may still do that, right? Or socially related, but under completely different circumstances for completely different reasons. But I believe that this conversation deserves the attention that it's getting, at least from me, in terms of bringing it to the fold. And also, I get to brag that I'm original and I'm doing something that nobody else is doing, right? I mean, could be worse. I could be listening to videos of the counterpart telling me how many toes they want in a man. I'd rather just read this article really than just listen to these counterparts telling you how many toes they want, how many fingers they want, how much hair in the nose they don't want. What a waste of my time. Evolution. This is what we're discussing. Right? Let's continue. This means that the feathers are an acceptation of flight rather than an adaptation. We read that. Adaptations can also become outdated, such as the tough exterior of the calabash fruit. I'm gonna mispronounce that. Cujete. Crescentia cujete, right? Let's continue. This gourd is generally thought to have evolved to avoid being eaten by comforters. Comforters. This is a new word. A family of elephant-like animals. There you go, elephants. They couldn't just say elephants, right? But these animals were extinct around 100,000 years ago, so the fruit's adaptation no longer has a survival benefit. This is very interesting. So the fruit evolved to have a tougher exterior and skin, maybe something akin to a coconut, to avoid being eaten by these prehistoric elephant-like animals called comforters. However, the fruit survived for 10,000 years, but their predator has since become extinct. This is very interesting. So while vasectomites might have a need to survive the knee benders, there is a high possibility that while the philosophy of the knee benders is popular today, that in a few thousand years they may all be very much extinct and the world may be with vasectomites with or without children. So, you want to have a kid, you're going to have to negotiate with the vasectomite, right? This doesn't mean that the population of Earth will grow down or that vasectomites still won't have kids. It just means that I think they'll be choosing much smarter and much differently, right? This is very interesting. This is very interesting. And so the survival skills that you may need, and I can even understand that in my own life. There are certain things that I needed to do as a young man that even sometimes I still have the skill and maybe even the inclination to do so. But while the skill remains, the circumstances around the necessity of that skill have all been completely eliminated by our evolution. None of those situations even exist anymore. Even the situations with the counterpart that I always refer to. It's just anecdotal. But I haven't seen that counterpart in years, and I doubt I'll ever see them again, right? And they would be shocked to find out that I have not only evolved as a vasectomite, I've become the proud voice of the vasectomites. Let's continue with the article. Selection of adaptation is not the only cause of evolution. I think if I had sound effects, that last statement would have landed with a little bit more oomph and emphasis. Some vigor behind it. But because I'm sort of like in an empty room, it just sounded like me. You know. But yeah, I'm not doing the sound effects. No, 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 no. Let's continue with confidence. It says selection of adaptation is not the only cause of evolution. Interesting. For example, species change can be caused by neutral mutations that may have no negative or positive effect on the individual. Change can also occur by genetic drift or gene flow. I'm not even sure what that means. For example, species change can be caused by neutral mutations which have no negative or positive effect on the individual. So change can happen just because change happens. This is like you can have a neutral mutation, something that has no positive or negative outcome on you and still evolve you. Change happens because change happens. This is what I'm getting from this. It is a domino that was kicked off a billion years ago, and it has just kept on going, and the dominoes of evolution are going to keep falling. And a part of me feels that within myself. I feel that the vasectomites have quite frankly kicked over a domino of evolution. And I can only imagine what will come next. You know, is this a neutral mutation? I think not. I think this mutation, this transition of freezing your sperm and getting a vasectomy, I think this is absolutely necessary. I think most men are going to find this to be not just necessary for survival, but also for progress and development to thrive. Change can also occur by genetic drift or gene flow. What does survival of the fittest mean in terms of evolution? I think that should have been another header. What does survival of the fittest mean? Let's talk about survival of the fittest. In terms of evolution, an animal that is fit is one that's adapted to its environment. That's a very interesting definition. So if you are fit, you are adapted to your environment. You are adapted to functioning and thriving in that environment. In other words, you fit into that environment. This concept is at the core of natural selection. Although the term survival of the fittest has often been misunderstood and may be best avoided, there is also a degree of randomness to evolution. This is also true, right? There is a degree of randomness to evolution. So the best, I mean, here I am randomly. So the best adapted animals won't always be the one to survive. It's very interesting, right? So it's not always the biggest, the strongest, and the fastest or the smartest that becomes the richest, right? Adrian explains, if you're going to get hit by a rock or something, it's just bad luck. But on average and over time, the ones that survive are the ones that are the fittest, the ones that have the best adaptation. This is true. All things being even, all things being equal. So effectively, what he's talking about is not getting hit by a rock. He's talking about the getting hit by a bus phenomenon, which I've also mentioned is very likely to unhappen. Very unlikely to happen. I beg your pardon. You're not going to get hit by a bus or a truck for that matter, right? You are the one that's going to hit the truck or the bus, right? But what he's saying is, other than these inexplicable divine interventions, acts of God, accidents, I ran out of time and I just decided to, change the screen while I was at it to continue the conversation. So, what I was saying that in the absence of any anomaly, right, should two people live exactly the same life, the one that is the fitter of the two is more likely to, rather, let's say, is more adapted to the situation, is therefore more likely, or the situation or the environment is therefore more likely to survive and thereby have a higher chance of reproduction and passing on his reproductive genes. It's really about the survival of the species. I get the feeling that there is, and I've called it, I don't know what to call it. There's a gene. There's just one strand of DNA. It's not the whole thing. It's just one thing that is within all humanity, and its prerogative is to survive and multiply itself. I don't know what to call it. I really don't know what to call it, but this thing is really the driving force within all. I have an inclination with me. I had a vasectomy to stop myself from having children, and yet I still have the inclination to perform the action. I still have the desire to perform the action, despite knowing that that action is not going to yield that result. That gene, that inclination, I don't know what you want to call it, that it is fundamental and it is core, and it will do anything to survive. Whether it survive within and of itself or in its likeness. And I don't know what to call it, but I'm just gonna call it a gene for lack of a better word. But I feel it. I feel it. I feel it, and have to remind myself that, you know what, I don't need to go out and pursue. I don't need to go and get it, right? But the gene is in there, right? And I think counterparts have this too, like the desire to be gotten and the desire to go and get this thing that is going to help the gene in itself or in its likeness to reproduce and thereby survive, right? And once it has accomplished that twice, what it then wants to do is multiply itself. So once it has accomplished survival, it wants to therefore multiply and thrive. It's a very interesting thing, and I just don't have the words to explain it. I just know how to describe the feeling, right? And this feeling will hit you anytime, anywhere. It'll hit you anytime, anyway, and it'll say pursue, pursue, right? And if you don't pursue, it'll say, well, how are you going to survive if you don't pursue? And you're trying to remind yourself that no, wait a minute. There's no survive. There's no survive. There's only the dark dimension. Even knowing that that inclination is still there. I'm I can combat it to a certain degree because I'm aware within myself, in my solitude, that it is there. But there are people who just respond to it and don't even know, and cannot even identify it. Because I feel quite, as a person who advocates for self-control, I can feel a certain control almost every aorta of my body, down from my toes to my fingertips. But there is something inside there that refuses to be controlled, and it's not stable. It doesn't stay in one place. It's not in the liver, it's not in the kidney, it's not in the legs. You feel it tingling in different places. I don't know how to describe it, but when I get that sensation, I'm aware of it. I just haven't named it. You start naming things that don't exist, you start to sound crazy. But you can describe a feeling, and maybe you know that feeling too. But it's frustrating being a vasectomite, having this feeling. As a bender, I can understand you have this feeling. You have a wife, you want to grow your family. The family grows, society grows, the gene grows, right? This is why I say benders are wrong. They think they're growing society, but they're growing this gene. It's just one gene that keeps multiplying itself in different variations. I cannot explain it, but I know it's there. Benders, they just respond. They just respond and continue to let this thing ruin their lives and not even knowing what it is, right? Sometimes they just lose control and just let the thing ruin their lives. What is Lamarckism? Lamarckism. Lamarckism. That C is something else. I think it's Lamarckism. Lamarckism. It's not a K, but it could be Lamarckism. I could be wrong. So what is Lamarckism? We'll just pronounce it as Lamarckism. I knew it. Lamarckism was named after a French naturalist, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. You see, I knew I was pronouncing it wrong. I knew that wasn't an English word, and I knew I was pronouncing it completely wrong. Maybe. So Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, it is another theory for why living things change over time. Living things change over time. But it takes a different approach to natural selection. Lamarckism proposes that animals acquire characteristics based on use or disuse during their lives rather than through hard coded genetic changes. That's very interesting. So, what do they say? You use it, you lose it, right? So, I agree to a certain extent. I agree, but there are some skills that you kind of remember, right? So, I'll give you an example of a skill that is completely underrated. Living a cash only society, or living in a cash only society, or living in a cash only life. We live in a very digitized world, right? Where you have to go online to get things, you have to use your card, you have to use your phone, you can use your watch, right? It's all just numbers and transactions, right? Moving on a digital platform. For some people to be able to switch to strictly cash only, this would be very difficult to do. While I have transitioned happily to a digital economy, I love everything about digital, right? I didn't rush into digital money, really. I took my time with it. I wanted to be sure about it. I wanted to have my concerns availed, and I feel like I have it in a way that I have it under control. I don't really have my cards loaded on anything. So I really just don't want to make it convenient to lose money. I don't want my cards on my phone. I'm one button away from buying everything that I want. I don't need that. I need to be able to click 20 buttons. And all the while I'm pressing these buttons, I'm changing my mind. That's really what I want. But effectively, I'm speaking now anecdotally. Some time ago, I was traveling to the Far East, and my bank card expired, and I needed to live cash for a few months. And I didn't have a problem with it. I didn't have a problem with it. I mean, eventually I was able to buy plane tickets and book hotels and do all kinds of things with cash. But it was quite an inconvenience. It like having my card, being able to pay for things online, being able to order taxis and pay in various different ways if you're not paying cash, that kind of thing. It's very convenient. There are pay points almost everywhere. But paying with living strictly in cash, paying rent in cash, everything, food, all that can be difficult, and you can lose the cash. I mean, you can lose your card too, but they can replace that. You lose the cash, they're not replacing the cash. So having that skill, I would say, came in handy, but it's really not something that I'm looking forward to doing again. I really, really don't want to find myself running on cash, right? Or just using cash. Like, I don't mind like using cash from my debit card, right? I always use cash from my debit card, but not cash money, like where I cannot access my card or put my money in the bank, like paper money. That became problematic after a while. It really became difficult because you're limited to only where you are, right? So you can't buy something from Australia. You can only buy something over here. And that's a problem, right? Because over here doesn't always have much. So, he says that, use it or lose it. Use it or lose it. I think this is where that theory comes from. In Lamarckian theory, giraffes stretch their necks to make them longer. These animals' offspring would inherit longer necks as a result of their parents' efforts. Adrian says, if you tried to stretch your neck for 10 minutes each morning, then you would probably end up with your neck being a few millimeters longer for a few years. But your children would not inherit it, and that's where their theory fails. That's very true. That's very true, right? So he says effectively, if you work out and you're healthy, right, and your kids are born, it doesn't necessarily mean that your kids are gonna work out and be healthy too, right? So if you practice something, if you stretch your neck, right, and you get a longer neck, it doesn't mean that your children are gonna be born with a longer neck. Effectively, you get the genetics that you get not through your own efforts, but rather through your parents' effort. So it's inherited. These characteristics, these survival characteristics are inherited. The last thing here says, are we still evolving? Yes, I would say we are still evolving. The fact that we have found another step to move ourselves forward, evolutionary, right, to still give us the same advantages and more in a permanent way, to me indicates that we have evolved. It also indicates that the vasectomites, in my opinion, are sitting at the top of the food chain. Something other than human. Not superhuman, but other than. Other than. Are we still evolving? For millennia, the world was viewed as static. The ideas that mountains could rise and climate and organisms could change didn't exist. Earth was thought to exist in an optimal form, but natural selection relies on the fact that the world is constantly changing, and so does the world of the vasectomite. It's something that you really have to accept, is that the world is constantly changing. And you don't have to really take everything with it, but you do have to take some of the advantages, like doing online banking is something that I really, really, I'm really slow and cautious about. And it's not that I don't trust it, because I've come to trust and rely on it, but I just don't want to lose my money very, very quickly. And I don't mean my money to be stolen. I mean, I just don't want to blow my money, you know. And like, I also don't mean, like, the things that I've bought online, I've loved all of them and appreciated all of them. Many of them I still have and use all the time. So I'm not even worried about getting something and not enjoying it. You know, sometimes you buy something online, you try it on, it doesn't fit. I've never had that problem. Everything I've bought online has come as advertised. In fact, when using the product, I've been very impressed and blown away. So I'm really not concerned about the quality of the product or anything like that. I'm just concerned that I will spend my money and finish it and then have no more money to spend, right? And I'm not saying this as a poor person. I'm just saying that I practice financial savings. I advocate for financial savings, right? Some people say invest, invest, invest. In the end, one of us has to be proven right or wrong, right? I'm going with the savings, right? Invest, make money, and save it, right? But yeah, that's my problem, right? So I must evolve. I must evolve. I must be cautious, but I must evolve as the vasectomites must evolve also, because this world is constantly changing and it is going to change even faster, right? It is going to change even faster. So we must take advantage. Truly, truly, we must. And I feel like I'm ready. Evolution occurs automatically for survival, and for millions of years, it has been playing catch up with our dynamic world. Is the world playing catch up to evolution, or is evolution advocating the world to move ahead faster? Organisms are either adapted enough to survive and reproduce, or they are suboptimal and the population shrinks. It may even shrink to zero, and that means extinction, states Adrian. I don't think that vasectomites are going to shrink the population. I think that even among vasectomites, we're still going to have men that want to bend the knee. Believe it or not, I said it before, many vasectomites are actually men who were married and have kids, right? They just don't want any more kids, but that doesn't mean they want to be alone. And that doesn't mean they don't want to get married, right? It just means that they don't want to have kids. Again, myself, I've taken an extreme position with no wife and no kids, but I have a billion sperm frozen, right? For very good reason. So I understand, and I also understand that some men might just want a specific number of kids. So he may say, I want one child or two children, right? And then I don't want any more. So a vasectomy or freezing your sperm just offers you more options, right? It just really offers you more options, so that you can do what you really, really want. But for some people, they believe that if vasectomites increase, the population of the world would decrease. I think the opposite would happen. Honestly, I think the opposite would happen. And also, people believe that, wrongly believe that in the situation where you get the infamous baby mama, where she has multiple children from multiple men, people think that's going to stop. That's not going to stop. That will never, 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 never stop, right? There are just some people with whom people want to have kids with. Like, a guy will genuinely want to have kids, and he'll want to have kids with you, and he'll be okay. You got kids with another man, he'll be okay with that, right? And he too can be a vasectomite, which means that he's not going to get you pregnant accidentally. But he's definitely going to get you, he's definitely going to want to get you pregnant, right? And if a woman wants to have a child and the vasectomite has sperm frozen over, There's no reason why, if you are married or in a relationship or in a situation where both of you want it and you can maybe sign a contract. Some of these guys won't even sign no contract. They'll just be like, yeah, you, yeah, you. You know, some guys will be in a situation where he's got 100 million sperm and he'll say, I want 100 million kids. I'm telling you the truth. If you think I'm joking, think like a man. Think like a man. Think like a man. He has 100 million sperm. What do you think he's going to do with those sperm? What do you think is going to happen with 100 million sperm? Think like a man, right? So people think that the population of the world is going to decrease if you freeze your sperm and get a vasectomy. No, no. These knee benders, they will become vasectomized and then bend the knee, and then bend the knee, just so they can add a new dynamic to the vasectomites. They'll be like, I'm a vasectomite, and yes, I bent the knee. You think they won't do this? You think they won't do this? It's only a matter of time before somebody comes to contrast the ancient one and says, no. Yes, he's a vasectomite, but he doesn't represent all of us. I'm a vasectomite. I have kids. I believe this. I love my kids. I'm a vasectomite and I had kids after my vasectomy. Yes, I froze my sperm and I executed the plan. I thought I had the sperm and I thought, you know what, I can still have kids, and I wanted to have kids. I just didn't want to have them with the wrong person or by accident. The mind of man is dynamic. The mind of man is dynamic. So people are worried that the world population is going to go down because of vasectomies. I assure you, probably population boom. But what we won't have is a situation of unplanned pregnancies. But yeah, there'll be, and if you're worried like, oh, men will want only a certain kind of woman, they want, no. With 100 million sperm, you get a baby, you get a baby, you get a baby, you get a baby. You don't have a man, you want a baby, there's a baby. Men will do that. Men will do that with women of every race, just not to have it accidentally. So I believe that population growth is inevitable with this exact thing. Freezing your sperm, getting a vasectomy. Definitely population growth is inevitable. I never once said that population was gonna decrease. I never even went that way because I know how you people think. You people are crazy. You people will have 100 million kids, and I'm not even playing. I'm not even playing, right? But so if you're worried that population growth is gonna go down to zero and that means extinction, nope, not with these guys, not with these guys. It says your scientists have been able to predict natural selection over short terms, but it's almost impossible to accurately determine its effects in the future due to unpredictable fluctuations of the environment. This is true. It's really difficult to predict what is going to be the future of the vasectomites. I mean, we could have an explosion that goes all the way up and then comes all the way down. Or we could have nothing at all. We could be the last of us. I don't think that'll be the case. I think it's a positive enough move that it allows men all the choices that they want and they get to experiment. I think there are some men that are genuinely willing to experiment in a serious, and expensive way with this type of technology. So it could get out of hand. It really could get out of hand on the one hand, but on the other hand, it could be very protective, right? The environment is really flexible, unpredictable, and it fluctuates. Natural selection implies that if organisms are surviving, they are adapted. This makes sense, right? If you are surviving, it means that you are adapted to the environment. It means that you can survive. But as the environment changes, and environments do change, we may find that what was once an adaptation may no longer be useful. In fact, it's possible to have something that was once an adaptation in one environment become a complete liability in another. You ever seen like a leader who has one leadership style and thrives in one environment, employs that same leadership style in a different environment, and then just tanks? It's just terrible, just sinks right to the bottom, right? Sports coaches may go through something like this, something similar to this, right? But yes, yes. So one thing, this is why you have to be flexible, right? You have to be like water, as the Grandmaster says, right? One strategy that works in one environment may not work in another environment. In fact, one strategy that works and is an asset in one environment may lead to failure and be a liability in another environment. It says here, oh, yes, yes, yes. Sorry, I was in the wrong place. Although it's possible for evolution to occur quickly, the more rapidly the planet changes, the harder it is for evolution to keep pace, and the more serious the risk of a massive rise in extinctions become. So, the more rapid the environment changes, and the slower that people are to adapt to environment, that means that they have a lower rate of adaptation, and adaptation means that you can survive in your environment. So if you cannot adapt, you cannot survive. If you cannot survive, you cannot thrive. You will become extinct. This was a very insightful article. When I started this, I really had no foundation on the theory of evolution and the theories around evolution. And although I'd heard about it, I'd never really encountered it in a meaningful way, in a substantive way, despite all my many years at school. Really, it just never came my way. It's something that you hear about a lot, and people would be discussing it, and you would associate it with other things. You could also follow and have an intellectual discussion on it, but it was never ever part of any of my coursework. I did do 6 months with a strategist, and all we did was talk about Sun Tzu and the art of war, which is part of the reason why I needed that book. But this was later on. This was already after I had already read the book, right? Because I had already bought the book, read it, gave it to a friend, and it was just ironic that we did it in this course. But he just mentioned it. He just mentioned it. He didn't really get into it. I'm talking about my lecturer now. He didn't really get into it, right? But and also he focused on other things like prisoner's dilemma. So he mentioned it, and he would teach a few things here and there, but he never really got into it the way that I did. I remember that professor very well. But he was really into prisoner's dilemma. If you're interested in strategy, he was so into prisoner's dilemma as a strategy. He loved nothing more than to play devil's advocate and give you three conflicting choices. He always had three conflicting choices, each worse than the other one in terms of consequences. That was his game, prisoner's dilemma. A horrible game, but it lets you know what your priorities are very quickly. If you're interested in strategy, look up at prisoner's dilemma and see what you would do under those circumstances. But yes, this is the end of the article. And again, I never got a chance to explore Darwinian theory of evolution, and I'll still read through it as much as I can. I don't know how much time I'll spend on it, but I'm curious enough to go deeper. But having gone through it now, it's very interesting stuff, and I do believe that the vasectomy and our rule of two, freeze your sperm, get a vasectomy, is right there. It follows all of the parameters, and in fact, even some of the corresponding theories can and conflicting theories too, they can all coincide and work together with why a vasectomy is evolutionary, and why I think you need to freeze your sperm and get a vasectomy. This has been a very insightful article, and really, I enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed it too. It did feel more like a dissertation of some type, an essay, really. There were some, there was in-text citations and quotations and dates and all kinds of things. So it felt very official to me. But I did like the information, and I found it very insightful, and I hope you do too. But this is the end of the video, and I hope you liked the video. I'm still practicing my new outro, but I hope to make it meaningful. Please like the video if you enjoyed the content. Please share it with a friend if you think that they will enjoy the content. Please leave a comment, right, to remain part of the conversation, and I will do my best to respond to as many of them as I can. So far, it's really not that difficult. I'm keeping up to date, but I'll do my best. I'm the Ancient One, the Bachelor Supreme. Now I just say, protect your seed, protect your solitude, protect yourself, freeze your sperm, get a vasectomy. Thank you for your time, your attention, and let me finish that off properly. Thank you for your time and your attention. I really appreciate it, and I always will. And I'm wishing you a wonderful, wonderful day.